So anyway, I am Chelsea Gomez. I am here to talk to you about trends in the small group market. What I know that all of us, at least that I can see on the list, all of us work in the small group market to some extent, whether you're new to it or whether that is exclusively what you do. So I'm going to know, I know at least because I know my agents, I know they're all great at their jobs. They know their small groups really well. I always wonder, do you know about small groups though as a whole? Because just because you have anecdotal evidence about what a small group is like doesn't always mean that you know the whole of every single small group across the country. And if you have that background knowledge, it can be a little helpful to you to have those discussions with those small group clients when they go, gosh, I really don't know if like a $1,200 deductible, that sounds really high. And you can say, well, the average across the nation is this, or well, if you want to have an edge, this is what you can do. Joining me today is my partner in No Crimes today, so far, Randy Wilbur.
It's
Randy, give the
early.
people what they want
It
before
is
we get
early
in.
yet. We have not committed any crimes just yet. And I won't admit to any crimes on a recorded session. By the way, we'll all get a recording of this session 24 hours from now, as always. Um, but anyway, I'm Randy Lober, Growth Marketing Manager here at Action Benefits. Part of my job, some of the most fun I have in my job is helping you all grow your books of business, right? And today, as Chelsea said, we're doing that by giving you an idea of what the overall landscape is in the small group market. So to look outside, help you look outside your little microcosms of where you work, like of Macomb County, or look outside of Oakland County, or so on and so forth. What's going on nationally? So when you look at your benefits and you're helping your groups determine like what comes next, how do we combat some of these increases, or so on and so forth? What's reasonably competitive? When we look at similarly situated groups, that's a valuable conversation to have, and that's the one we want to help you have here today. Should you have any questions, comments, concerns, or curse words, put them in the chat or Q&A. I will help field them as Chelsea takes us away here.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Randy. So just so that you know where we're going today, here are some of the things we are going to cover. We're going to first, as promised, talk about what's the average small groups look like across the nation. We're going to talk about what those pain points on overarchingly are plaguing the small groups across the nation. We're going to give you some suggestions about either what our survey data says are things that the agent can do to solve those pain points, or some Randy and Chelsea specials of things that we think are helpful, even if they weren't included in the survey. How you could become a one-stop shop for your small group and not necessarily solve problems, but be the person that they see as a go-to for their problems within their small groups, so that you can just be on front of mind with them at all times and have do some things that aren't necessarily what you would think about a small group, but can also keep you around for them. They can talk to you more often. And then some things that keep you ahead of the curve so that it makes it easier for you to either have that initial conversation about coverage, or talk about some of the stuff that might not be affecting your small group right now, but is coming down the pipeline. And then just so that you know where this data all came from, this data was collected from KFF's 2025 Health Benefits Survey. Just in case you want to play along at home, there is the link to the survey I used to create these slides. Just about all of the data, except for some of the stuff that, Chelsea just wants to talk about, that is helpful to your small group that KFF didn't talk about. Anything that is like the statistics came from the KFF Health Benefit Survey that I put on in the chat there. So if you want to play along at home, there you go. So let's get into it. What is the average small group like? And again, I've said it a couple times, but just to be safe, this data is for the entire country. They did not break this data down into a state by state basis. So we do have some prior knowledge about what the state of Michigan is like, and we have some about like Ohio and Indiana. But this is for the whole nation. And as an FYI, KFF does only use survey results that are not following the standard definitions of a small group. So what I mean by that is uh, we we might think of small groups a little differently, whether we are using the definition the ACA uses or whether we're using the definition that Blue Cross uses or whatever, our own personal definitions of what's small. They use their own definition of small group, and I will usually put that into the slide for you to let you know, or I will tell you if it's not on the screen, or just ask and I can let you know what exactly the parameters of small group. So don't get too fixated on exactly what small group numbers are. So I purposely kept these off the slide so you can guess along at home if you so choose to do that. And if you want to put a guess into the chat as to what these numbers are, go ahead. But if not, that's okay. I just thought it was more fun to make it a little bit of a guess. So the percentage of firms with 10 to 24 workers that offer health benefits in 2025. So last year, what percentage do you think of groups offered health benefits that were 10 to 24 in size? And that is 51%. Oh, someone guessed 90. Oh, okay, it was 51. So about half give that's okay. Well, now you know that you have a lot of groups out there who either it's about half and half, right? So about 50% of them, if you walk in any small group, half the time you've got a client ready to go, right? That might be interested in getting some health coverage, somebody brand new to the game that you get to mold and shape into whatever you kind of coverage you think is best for them. So about half offer of that size group offer health benefits. And then for 10 to 199 workers, that number is slightly higher at 59%, so about 60% of them, so it goes up a little bit. And then this might be a little easier for you guys to get, maybe, I guess you, unless if you work across the nation, or how we'll see how similar you think Michigan's premiums are. So the average annual single person premium in that size group is $9,325. That's how much they pay over the year, by the way, not monthly. So that is not their average monthly premium. But this is the average amount of premium dollars they spend over the course of the year. And the average family spends $26,054 across the nation on premiums every year. So this data might be something to arm yourself with when you walk in the door. If you're talking to your clients first time, second time, 20th time, but what that coverage should cost or what percentage of them offer it if they're looking to differentiate themselves from the rest of small groups. These are the figures I would kind of think about.
And to be clear, this is total net premium, right? This is not employer contribution or employee contribution. This is just the net premium for the single and net premium for the family. We'll talk about contribution levels in just a moment here, and there's lots of conversation to have there as well.
Yes, we're going big to small today. So this is the big overarching, this is how much everybody pays across the board, not counting all the contributions of other parties. So the larger the firm, the more likely they are to offer benefits. You probably already knew that, or could guess that at least, but this is how the data actually breaks down. We already talked about that 10 to 24 worker BARC and about 51% of them offering coverage. And then we hit up to 64 for 25 to 49. And then 50 to 99, it's almost all of them, large chunk. And you probably, as you already know, why the law kind of tells them they have to. So the larger the group, the more likely it is that they offer benefits. So what does this mean for you? As an agent, you have an attack plan that you can create based on this data. So depending on how you want to spin it, right, for yourself, you know that, like I said, if you walk into a small group business, about half the time you are going to walk into a client that has no coverage and you have a fresh, clean slate to work with. And if you were to spin that for the small group, you would say that, okay, if you want to stand out, if you want to be better or offer more, then about half of the small businesses out there attracting coverage or attracting new clients, that coverage option is going to be something that is attractive to throw out there. For 25 to 49 workers, you still have a lot of room to offer solutions, about 45-ish% offer have no coverage and you can start them off with something. And then 50 plus is not totally off the table. There was about, I wanted to say what, like 10, 20% that weren't offering coverage. You could walk in there and get new business from them. But it might not be a focus that you have, and it's not really what our co-brokers are helping you with, but you still could go in there.
Yeah, we should point out that probably if I were a betting man, I would bet all the money in my pocket against all the money in Chelsea's pocket that if you were one of those 50% or 45% in the 10 to 24 or 25 to 49 range that aren't offering benefits, it's probably due to cost, right? And the big thing to take away here is sure, maybe major medical benefits may feel, look, sound like they're out of reach for that group, but that doesn't mean the door is totally closed, right? Those group you can still lead the way with voluntary benefits, voluntary dental, voluntary hospital indemnity, supplemental products, right? Things to get their feet wet to and to help boost that benefit portfolio, boost that employer's ability to attract and retain talent. But something that comes at fairly low premium cost to the employer. Sure, there's an admin cost, but as an agent, you're there to help kind of defray that as well, right? But it tells us there's opportunity, no matter how you slice it. It's just how are you going to access that opportunity? Are we going to come in with that Cadillac, the health insurance plan, or are we going to find other ways to help employers take care of their employees with those voluntary benefits? And I think that's a pretty good option, I think, for these 50% of firms that don't have anything just yet.
And it actually, we've been offering a little bit more for you, a little more variety of carriers that can offer some of those voluntary benefits, right? We have Beam we've started working with as well, so check that out. If you think that those voluntary benefits are something that your small groups are interested in. So next, let's take a look at what the small firm worker is. So when I say small firm, I generally mean about 10 to 199 workers. That is what KFF determined is a small firm worker. Um, so first of all, the small firm workers, there's kind of a have not going on here. About 35% of those who work at a small firm earn more than $80,000 a year. So in my head, what I kind of imagine is maybe like a shop of some kind, or like a service business where you have a manager, right? You have one person who's kind of earning more, and then you have the employees who are doing the actual labor themselves, or they're running the restaurant, or they're creating the whatever, going to the service calls, and they are the ones who are making of that other percentile, that other chunk, and they're making less than that $80,000 a year. We also know that about 35% of them are 50 and older. And I'm going to, go ahead and guess that they probably also fall into that category of people who are making $80,000 a year. And as someone who is aging, I'm not quite 50 yet, but as someone who is aging, I will say that the older I'm getting, the more coverage I'm looking for. And I will say that the older I'm getting, the more money I have, the more likely I am to spend that money on health coverage. So I'm going to infer, I don't have the data to support it, but I'm going to infer that that 35% that's earning $80,000 a year and that 35% that are 50 and older have a strong overlap. And then we go to the other side of the coin where there is that larger chunk of younger workers. And those younger workers are way less likely to be covered by this small firm or this small group. And that is way particularly true in comparison to a larger firm where these younger people are more likely to take the coverage. So that number down there, that 39%, younger workers are 39%, 39% of them, I should say, are taking the small group coverage, where 64% of them are taking the coverage from a large group or a larger firm. So what that's telling me is that they have a perception that this larger firm coverage is better, and they are going with the larger firm coverage if they have a spouse, right? If that's an option for them, if they're married and they have a spouse and they're working for a large conglomeration or whatever, they're taking that coverage from that larger conglomeration. Or the other thought that I had was that these younger workers are very young, they are 26 and below, and they're still able to be covered by their parents. So they're taking that route, and presuming that their parents are not making them pay those premiums, and it's cheaper for the zero is cheaper than anything for them. So they're probably taking that coverage from their parent. But for those who are taking the coverage from this smaller firm, there is a much wider amount who are taking PPOs than there are people taking HMOs. There is a large percentage, about 33% are taking a high deductible health plan. And then there's a small percentage that are taking that point of sale plan. So the distribution of types of network are probably honestly what you would expect. If I were to guess, this is probably what I would have expected. Well, maybe a little more HMO action, um, and a little less PPO action, but I would say that's about what I would guess. All right. Oh, where'd my mouse go? There it is. Okay. So now that we have a picture of what small groups look like overarchingly, again, nationally, not just in Michigan, but nationally, what pain points are affecting your small group? So what's on their mind as things that are either barriers to the entry of small group coverage, or what is currently affecting them as a pain point for their coverage that they already have. So I organized it by the type of pain points. So the first pain point is how costs are getting even higher across the board. So for these small firms, these are the 10 to 199 workers that we talked about earlier. So the average annual family premium cost to employers for a small firm, again, this is for the employers, is $17,165. And that is a little cheaper than what the average annual family costs for a larger firm, which is $21,453. So there is a little bit of perceived cost savings here for a small firm for a family in comparison to a larger firm. But that might be shrinking as small group premiums are growing, and they're growing fast. And they have grown 26% over the last 5 years. So we've been seeing a lot of increased growth, and I'll show you exactly what that looks like on the next slide. The average employer contribution for family coverage in a small group is 64%. And for large, that's a less than larger firms. So larger firms have about 77%. And then the percentage of small group employees that spend 12K or more for that family's coverage is 28%. So that's quite a larger percentage than the larger firms that have it at 11%.
Yeah, and I think that contribution figure, the third thing here on the screen, is super important, right? When you're working with small groups, a lot of owners or decision makers at least want to do right by their employees. They want to take care of them. They want to pay that 100%. But gosh, even if you're contributing 70%, you're still doing better than the national average, and you're still taking care of your employees, right? You're offering some good protection for them there. So if there's one thing I'm taking away from here, right, as a solution is, and we'll come to this a little bit later, is contribution percentages are probably one of the easiest levers for an employer to pull when looking for the opportunity to either offer more protection or to save some of their own premium dollars. Um, but we should also mention now, like when a group asks you, like, hey, what are the other groups doing? Well, you can say, on average, they cover about 65% of that or 64% of the family premium. Where do you want to come in when thinking about designing your own coverage? Do you want to be above average? Do you want to be at average? Or do you want to be below average? Probably a different way to frame that question going forward. Like nobody wants to be below average, but that's where a good point to start that conversation at.
It's hard. I really don't. That's what I think is so interesting about the small group market. Like, I really struggle to think here when I look at these data numbers that like small groups are healthier, so they're getting less money contributed just because there's less of a need. To me, it just seems like I would guess that the small groups are more conservative. They about spending their dollars on health insurance because they just want to make sure that they and have all their bills paid, right? There's more at stake in a small group scenario. And this is really where you can take a look at that small group and make choices that are best for that group of people, right? When you have a large group, you have to cover all these different scenarios, all these different people. That's not the case with the small groups. You can really get in and dive in, and I'm getting ahead of myself because that's what other slides are going to talk about. But it's just so interesting to me in comparison to a larger group, you know? But like I said, all these figures are kind of telling me overall that small groups are more likely to leave a little bit more of the bill on their employees instead of the employer themselves, just because for a multitude of reasons. And we can prove that here with this bar graph. So this graph is telling us the average overall premiums between 2015, 2020, and 2025, so the last 10 years. And it's telling us what those premiums were, and these are the year, of course, not no one's paying a $17,000 a month premium. And it's telling us the worker contribution in comparison to the employer contribution. So you can see that while yes, everybody's paying more all the time, let's not villainize, I guess, the employer, but the workers are paying more. How did I say it yet? How was I saying it? They're doing more mores. They're paying more mores than the employer group is paying, right? So yes, there's a 5% increase in the last 10 years that employers are taking. And this is not just small groups, by the way. This graph covers large, small, all groups across the entire nation. So yes, groups are paying more, but the workers are paying more of more, right? So they're covering more of their health insurance that they have in the past 10 years than they were in previous years. And of course, costs are going up all across the board. So, as you might have been able to guess from that chart that I just showed you, deductibles are also going up, right? So the average larger group deductible is $1,670. And then the average deductible for those working at an employer with 10 to 199 workers, because that's just how KFF organized their data, is $2,631. So that is quite a jump, right? For those of us who are thinking in terms of what is considered a high deductible health plan, the average larger group deductible hasn't hit that really. It's close, it's very close, but it hasn't hit that yet, where the 10 to 199 worker deductible has blown that out of the water, right? It's like almost $1,000 higher. So the percentage of larger groups that are in a high deductible health plan is about 28%. But if you look at small groups or smaller firms, that is 53%. So small groups are way more likely to have a high deductible health plan than a larger group, and that higher deductible is likely to be higher, more of more, once again, unfortunately. And we can see that in this chart here. So the percentage of workers enrolled in a plan with a high annual deductible in 2025. You can see small firms, large firms, and all firms. Small firms are way more likely every single time. So you can use that both ways, right? You can just say, hey, high deductibles, that's just par for the course. That's what's going to happen in a smaller firm. 75% of them, you're right alongside with what the average is. Or you can flip it and say, if you want to stand out, you can put a lower deductible plan out there for your employees, your workers, and that is a benefit you can tout to have as a retention strategy or a recruiting strategy for those small groups. So our third point is on average, fewer small group employees take the coverage that is available to them. So what I mean is when you look at a small group, on average, approximately 80% of the workers are eligible to take the coverage that is available when it is offered. That's taking away those who might be in a waiting period because they're new, or those whose part-time status might affect their eligibility, stuff like that. So if we figure for all that, about 80% of the workers in a small group are eligible for the coverage across the nation. And then about 76% of those 80% actually enroll in that coverage. And the lower the wage, the less likely that worker is to enroll in the coverage. So if your small group does skew towards having more employees with lower wages, like we talked about earlier with it's like the manager and then the couple of lower waged employees, that number is going to skew even lower. Randy and I did some napkin math this morning, and we figured it's about 60%. So about 60% of the small group is going to participate in the health plan, roughly, if we use these numbers. So across the nation, roughly about 60% of the group is going to participate in the coverage that you put out to them on average. And that's the hard part with small groups and averages. Like every small group is going to be different, of course, but if your small group is asking, that's the percentage there. And the final pain point we are going to talk about is that there is a lot of gaps, whether they're in the coverage that's offered to small groups, and whether that gap is real or perceived, it is affecting how often that the small group employees choose to take that coverage. So when they are asked about this, their coverage, 44% of them will say they have no wellness programs available. So that's like your Livongo, that's your I think it was Maven, the maternity health benefits, all those programs that are baked into some of those plans, whether and again, that's whether the group knows they're there or not. It doesn't matter if they don't know that they're there, they're not using them, they're going to say that they don't exist, even if they do. So there's two things you can take away from these numbers. It's if it's a education thing or if it's a actual thing that's missing. 71% say they have no telehealth options. 61% of the stakeholders here said that they had high or moderate concerns about the affordability of the plan, so there's an affordability gap. And then 44% of the stakeholders said they had a high or moderate concern about the use of prior authorizations within the plan. So all those things are creating some sort of gap or pain point for the people who are utilizing that plan. And then some GLP-1 data. We're going to talk again about GLP-1s in a second, but I purposely put this information here because it is relevant specifically to small groups. So the pain point here is that there's not a lot of groups that are able to offer GLP-1 coverage to their employees. The measurements in KFF weren't even existing for whether or not GLP-1s are covered until they hit the 200 worker mark. And then 61% of those who do offer GLP-1 coverage in a larger group said they were unlikely to cover them if they didn't already. So that tells us that GLP-1 coverage is something that is on the minds of your groups. It's coming down the pipeline if they have not asked about it already. And here are we're going to talk a little bit more later about some strategies you can use as an agent to have those discussions. But it is a good idea to have that mindset around it, whether if you're going to get those questions as to, hey, is this something I should be offering my employees, or, am I the bad guy if I don't? Well, the numbers are so small that they're not even available. So what does that tell you as a small group agent? Overarchingly, is that workers' coverage complaints are likely similar to the complaints that they're going to have if they're in a large group, but there is a couple of key differences. Premiums are going to be slightly lower, but workers tend to be responsible for a higher percentage, so that savings is going to kind of come out in the wash. Oftentimes, just because the employer is not going to contribute as much to that premium as they might in a larger group. They are way more likely to have a high deductible health plan. That deductible is way more likely to be 1K or higher. And whether or not it's perceived or not, there's much more of a chance that a perk in that health insurance will be missing in comparison to those larger groups. So I like to stop. I've told you a lot of things. I'm sure you have some thoughts on your mind, whether or not that is something that I said that sparked one of your small groups. You're like, oh, I've talked to that about that problem with one of my groups before, or whether that's something you've always wondered, and now you know. Does any of this ring true for your small groups? Go ahead and put either in the chat to Randy and myself, or to everyone. Does any of this ring true for your small groups?
I think while they're warming their typing fingers up, right? Like we get questions all the time here in the office is what's going on with GLP-1 coverage? Do I have options for it? Yeah, really among smaller groups, under 200 lives, GLP-1 coverage is harder to find, at least GLP-1 coverage for obesity, right? Diabetes is a different story that we'll dive into a little bit later, but even larger groups are really hesitant to cover it. People who are self-funding their benefits and really have a lot of choice over how they, arrange those benefits, whether or not they do or do not, or carve in or carve out. Um, all kinds of medications. They're finding that a hard thing to cover here as well. Seeing some more folks chime in about deductibles, saying pretty much nodding and saying, "Yep, my groups do pay higher deductibles. They're not too happy about it." So glad to, I mean, not glad, I guess, but it's good to see that the data is consistent and it reflects kind of our lived experience here in Michigan as well.
I always giggle when I think of small groups, health insurance, selling to small groups, because when you think about other products that small groups would create, I think of like ice cream parlor, like, oh, I really don't like that flavor. Okay, you just don't buy that flavor again. You don't sell it anymore. You unfortunately, as a health insurance agent, can't take the feedback of my deductible's too high and go, okay, I'll add less deductible to the recipe next time, put it on. You really kind of stuck with what is offered to you. So yes, when you have those complaints about the deductibles, you just want to do something about it, but you can't. Anyway, so I'm not just gonna rain on your parade, give you a bunch of problems, and say, oh well. I'd like to help you try your best to solve them. And we're going to start first with the solutions that were measured by KFF, right? So this isn't, I'm not saying these are the only solutions or these are the solutions that you should take or that you have to take. These are just the ones that KFF perceived existed and talked about them, measured them. So the first one we have for you is if you, and it sounds like in the chat, this is the biggest one, the biggest pain point for small groups of the people we're talking to today. If you can't beat high deductible health plans, if you've tried this way and that way, and also, and the high deductible plans are just the way that your small group is going to tackle this, then at least make sure that your clients understand completely and are fully reaping the benefits of consumer-driven health plans like FSAs, HSAs, stuff like that. So I don't want to talk too long about what happens in an HSA, FSA, all that stuff. We have a different webinar for that. We can dive into those. But just so we can understand the conversation, $1,700 deductibles are required to have a high deductible health plan, with the lower premiums being the trade-off. And those accounts can be loaded by both the worker and the firm. So you could potentially say, hey, we're going to take a higher deductible health plan in comparison to this lower premium one, but I'm going to put that difference back into an account for you so you can choose to use that money in other ways, such as potentially pay for some costs of some of your services or for, co-insurance, whatever. And that money is portable. So don't be confused if with FSAs where that money stays with the employer, and make sure they're understanding all the ways that they can invest those accounts as well. So there's so many benefits to HSAs. I don't think everyone is aware of, and understands. And that's where you as the agent really come in and make sure that they understand all those benefits and utilize them. And like I said, we have another webinar where we're going to talk about consumer-driven health accounts. But just throwing this up there in case some of you are like, oh, I don't really work with those, or oh, I've never really thought about HRAs before because they're not as talked about. They're up here, and then head to our YouTube account to take a look at some of our consumer-driven health account webinars to learn more details about those. And it is a popular option, right? So the amount of high deductible health plans are on the rise overall. So whether or not you see that as a good thing or a bad thing, that it is an option that people are taking, right? So they're there. You're not a bad guy if you want to put a high deductible health plan onto your employers. But to me, I guess it's really up to the agent to make sure that the why of not being a bad guy is put in front of those employers. Okay, so our second solution is to rethink the way that contributions are set up. So as we kind of looked at earlier, small firms do tend to contribute a little less to the premiums than larger firms do. And I'm sure we can postulate as to why that might be, but the facts are the facts. So we could offer some cheaper coverage that could solve that issue, or the employer could contribute a little more to give an edge to other small firms to kind of have a better retention strategy or retainment strategy, whatever. There are a lot of ways that you can mess with those numbers to have things come out in the wash to make it cheaper or more pricey for either the employer or the employee. And also keep in mind that dependents might also be a way to reconfigure that to save costs. And again, this is all going to be dependent on the small group, right? Maybe you happen to have a situation where there's no dependents involved. Not an issue.
Yeah, and it is increasingly likely right across all markets for dependent coverage to either be lean or dependent contributions rather to be either leaner or non-existent. Um, so you might cover 100% of your employee, but 0% for dependents. That's becoming more and more common, especially in the mid-market. You, for us as we think about that going forward. Not that it's an option that your employees will love, or the group's employees will love going forward, but it's certainly an option for helping to manage costs, right? If you still want to offer coverage, still do something to help out, but you can't help out everyone. There's a middle ground to be had there, right? Or same thing, you can contribute a set dollar amount per contract or a set percentage amount per contract. And I'm sneaking that in there because it's a nice segue to where Chelsea's going to take us next.
This was my favorite thing to play with when I first started working here because I thought it was so interesting when I first was trying to understand the ins and outs of health insurance. So, coverage for one, or I'm sorry, coverage for companies. Sorry, coverage for companies. We have so many technology tools, man. So coverage for companies. I bet some of you in the chat are using this already and can already speak to how easy it is to help your small groups figure out how they're going to contribute to their employer coverage. But we have this nifty tool in here that can really, better than anything else, I think, help you determine how to contribute to these types of your types of plans here. So you can contribute a flat dollar amount, a flat member level defined percentage. You can contribute to just based on what the lowest cost plan is. You can contribute to what the highest plan is. There's you can contribute just to the employees. You can contribute just to the dependent. There's so many ways you can slice and dice contributions that you really can get stretch the dollars and maximize what makes sense for each individual group, right? And this was even really fun to me. You could, if you choose the percentage option, just as an example, you can throw in different percentages and make these numbers dance. Have an example rate, have how much the employer pays, employee pays, until you really say, oh, I really don't want my employees to pay more than X amount for their health insurance. Okay, cool. Well, we can make that happen. Or we can say, I don't want to pay more than this amount. Okay, we can make that happen. And you can sit right there with them and figure and figure and figure until you get the exact number you would like. And you could do that within coverage for companies. Randy, I think you're demoing that next week. So that if you are interested in learning more about that, if you don't use that tool already, you can see how to do that later. And then our third solution that we have is an ICHRA. And this is a tricky one because it's not, this data was given to us on a national level. I've said that 1,000 times, right? So in Michigan, I would not necessarily always say that ICHRAs are the best option. for a group. It's not going to be the first thing you trot out, but it is an option, right? And it's an option that could be used especially for small groups that have employees that are living across multiple states, and it might be hard to juggle all those different plans, those different contribution things. But ICHRAs are an option.
And to add some color about why they might work in other states but not Michigan, right? It's all comes down to that rate delta. What's the gap between what you can find in a plan on the marketplace for that individual premium versus what you would pay on the employer plan? In Michigan, that gap is fairly narrow, the price point between individual and employer plans, and it's getting narrower, right? We saw most individual plans take a 20% increase this year. So they're like catching up, right, in premium to where oftentimes that admin cost that's mentioned on the last line here just doesn't make sense for a small group, right? If I have this extra admin cost, it's going to be more of a headache to try to implement the NCRA. Like the cost savings just really aren't there in a lot of cases for small groups in Michigan, at least, unless you are a very young, very healthy group to work with it. The other thing to point out is that in Michigan, and I assume in other markets as well, is that the or the benefits you see on a marketplace plan and the network you see on a marketplace plan simply don't compare to what's available on the employer market or the employer group market. So it'd be really hard to sell ICHRAs as a win to the employees. Like, sure, thanks for the contribution, but now I have coverage that just isn't as good. That doesn't feel good, right? Especially if the group's already had benefits. So if I'm looking at ICHRA implementation, I'm looking for two things. One is the group's first experience with benefits, right? So I'm not giving them something that feels bad, looks, sounds, smells worse. That employer experience. I'm also looking for something where the rate gap makes sense, where the difference between employer and employee premiums is so vast, where I just can't ignore that single premium on the marketplace, that family premium on the marketplace. And that really explains a lot of difference why we see ICHRAs taking off in Ohio versus in Michigan, where adoption is admittedly much slower because the gap between individual plans and employer plans is so much greater in Ohio. It just makes a ton more sense for smaller firms in Ohio than it does in Michigan.
Building on that too, there are some laws that have been rolled out in Ohio already. It's rolled out in Georgia. Indiana has started dating the idea of putting some tax benefits out there for ICHRA accounts in comparison to non-ICHRA accounts. So those are other reasons why they might be more popular in other states. And if those things come to Michigan, as they are in our bordering states down south, maybe we'll see a flip. But for now, I'm just telling you what's happening now. And that's why you're probably going to hear about these things from small groups. And it's a good idea to be dangerous enough to have a conversation, but you might be working to kind of steer them in a different direction once they really get the data about their situation put in front of them in comparison to what they've heard on in the news or whatever. So 18% of those surveyed, those small groups that were surveyed said they are somewhat likely to offer an ICHRA in the future. And again, across the nation. So maybe you're not hearing a lot about them from your clients. Maybe you are. If you are, let me know. Put it in the chat. Are you hearing a lot about these? I don't know. Let me know. So how do you present these solutions to your small groups? Tell me. Do you talk a lot about these consumer-driven health accounts? Do you sit down with your clients and talk about the different ways to contribute, or do you, just let them lead that conversation? Do you hear a lot about ICHRAs? Or what other solutions that are out there do you talk about that we didn't talk about? And again, like I said earlier, we're not saying these are the only solutions, right? There are definitely more solutions out there. It's just that these are solutions that were on KFF's radar to discuss and measure.
One thing I know is we've talked to our account managers here, is they've all talked with you about how you're managing your business. Is you often probably still have a lot of room to play with underwriting rules, right? You don't have to offer just one plan to the employer rather doesn't have to offer just one plan to your employees. In most cases, you can offer three or four, right, depending on size, so on and so forth. So that presents plenty of opportunity to have that buy up and buy down option. So you can offer something that that's targeted for maybe your lower income workers on the plan, something that's targeted toward your higher income workers who might want to pay more, or people who might want to, don't mind paying a little bit more in premium, get the coverage there. Um, so you have options, right? It's all about knowing the rules and how you can play inside them. And lots of conversation coming in from Cindy here as well. You're muted, Chelsea, but I'll summarize it here. Cindy's mentioned again that ICRAs really just haven't been competitive in Michigan just yet, an emphasis on yet. We can envision a day where they will be, but it's not there just yet. Um, and downgrading the coverage rate, looking for higher deductibles and out of pocket is the current solution. But also, we also know that that doesn't feel great, right? So if you're creating bigger gaps in the health plan, supplemental products like your hospital indemnity, like your accident plans can really help wrap around that and make it worthwhile. Are you eating up some of the premium savings you realize by switching down to a lower or a higher deductible plan? Yeah, but you're also giving a richer benefit and a usable benefit to those employees as well. So there's like everything in health insurance, there's a bit of a trade-off. You're going to pay me more or pay me later, me being the health insurance company, not me personally. Um, but there's lots of ways to make it work, sound, feel, taste, smell better as you're going forward.
Yes. Uh, there is so many other options too that we didn't talk about that can help, but these are just the ones that KFF talked about, just so we are aware. Okay, so these are the other options of things that you can talk about to kind of help mitigate some of the pain points. So starting small, just like the group, right? So if employee retention is an issue, offering some health coverage is better than about 50%. So even at the end of the day, this kind of feels almost like therapy talking, like in a way, like I have a feeling that small group people are want to really feel and do best for their employees, right? They care deeply about giving them the best that they can, right? And maybe they do get hung up on, oh man, this deductible is so high, I feel terrible. Oh man, I wish I could contribute more. Even if they're doing something, they're doing better than about 50% of the small groups out there, right? So you can always adjust, right? We can come back at your renewal and change up our contribution strategy. It's only going to hurt for a minute. It's not going to be that way forever. And then if they can't offer anything at all, if they can't contribute, offering supplementary benefits like we talked about, we mentioned it a little bit earlier. We're bringing it back again. Offering supplementary benefits can be something you offer right away. There's there's often not a waiting period, and it is something that can be at just about no cost to the employee, right, or employer, right? So if the employer doesn't have much to contribute, they can at least say, hey, we can offer you these things for now, supplement, and then we can revisit health coverage at a different date, right? And then that keeps them in your back pocket to continue to have those conversations as you move forward in the years ahead, as that relationship moves on. Drug costs are the highest problem that they are perceiving as well when they are utilizing the plan itself. And because you are a Blue Cross agent, you don't always have the same tools that you might have in other types of plans, right? The formularies are kind of the formularies, right? With Blue Cross plans. So you're having to do diligence more with your educational pieces, right? When it comes to the drug costs. Right. So either you're going to try to educate your employees on how to best navigate those tier systems within the formularies, or you're going to teach them how to navigate what pharmacy they're going to ensure that they're getting the cheapest costs, right? I can speak to personal experience on both of those situations on how you can navigate pharmacies and new or different prescriptions to get a better cost option.
Yeah, if you are not yet talking to your groups or haven't yet talked to your groups about how that price estimator tool inside the Blue Cross app or any other carrier, because they all have price estimator tools, but so many people just don't use them, right? Because the tools are buried behind layers. But if you can teach people to go there, to get there, to find out how to estimate prices for their drugs, you can see that, I have a 90-day drug that I fill every 90 days. But I can see a $200 swing, right? I'm covered the same way by the plan, but depending on where I get it filled, I can see a $200 swing for that 90-day prescription on that. And as the slide points out here, you've also got Trump RX, Good RX, Cost Plus Drugs, all kinds of ways that you get to get that prescription filled. No, it's not always going to count toward your cost accumulator, so it's not always going to count toward deductible or out-of-pocket maximum. But if it's a drug you need, maybe that's a price you're willing to pay or a price you have to pay to find uh, something affordable that doesn't feel you left hollow at the end of the prescription fill.
So the example drug that kept coming up again and again um, with KFF was GLP-1s. So that's the stats of ones, just for an example that we're going to use to navigate through this drug cost stuff. So about 16% of large groups or groups 200 to 999, like we said, there is no data available for small groups. 16% of them are covering GLP-1s. It's costing about $15,000 per person. And 66% of those firms are saying that it significantly raised their drug costs. And if we take a look at all groups, not just large, across the board, about 40% of workers across the board are going to qualify for GLP-1s. So these are going to be something that's affecting the drug cost, one of the higher things affecting drug costs. One of the questions that had been asked that was talked about in KFF is a lot of them think they don't completely always understand the way health insurance works. They're asking if HMO versus PPO is going to lower their drug costs. And the answer is usually no, right? We know that, but this is a question that they're being asked. I did the comparison for your Blue Cross things for you across the formularies. There's not really much of a cost saving difference. There's some, I'm not saying there's none, there's some, but it's not a huge one, and I don't think it would be the largest decision making element as to whether or not to pick an HMO versus a PPO. Diabetic drugs, of course, and that's the reason why I chose one as one of the options, the example. They are they are one of the ones that do change a little, but it's not a ton. And as you probably already know, as a great health insurance agent, copays, coinsurance, and deductibles are the best options for cost savings. Take a look at an HMO versus a PPO for formularies. For these GLP-1s, the only difference is being that I'm not going to pretend I can say that, Ligliritude, the Sazdexa, and the Victoza, not Victoria. This is not a person. Sorry. It is a non-preferred or generic and PHMO versus PPO. And I'm not going to tell you that that's not going to save you money. It is. But it might not be it might probably isn't going to be the only reason you're going to choose an HMO or a PPO for just that specific drug and for that specific coverage in the drug. And then also keep in mind that these drugs do require step therapy and have a quantity limitation on them when you get them filled, which is one of the ways Blue Cross saves you money in the formulary world. So if you're going to be hit with that question as to how is the cost, if I want to cover it or if I don't want to cover it, either way, how are these costs being contained? The GLP-1 cost containment is a thing that Blue Cross does through prior authorization, lifestyle program participations, and step therapy and prior authorization. But remember that all plans should be covering GLP-1s for type 2 diabetes anyway. So don't worry if you have someone on the group who's saying, oh, maybe they're a new group and this person is type 2 diabetic and they're terrified that, oh, I heard that small groups aren't going to cover that. Different story for type 2 diabetes. Obesity is what usually people think of when they're thinking it's not covered. And then I have some bits and bobs that I wanted to bring to your attention that you can use to show up for your small groups. You can go beyond the plan. The plan is not the only way that you support. We talked about earlier about how education is such an important portion of what you do. So putting some of this data in front of your clients and showing how their plan stacks up against the average can maybe help them feel a little bit better about some of the pain points or knowing what pain points to attack to use as a strategy for retention or for recruitment. You as the agent are probably already doing this, but it's worth saying for those who haven't thought of this or who aren't doing this, attend their open enrollment events, be that face for the product to their employees so that they know who to ask, who to talk to, if that employer wants to allow that to happen, or if they want other questions about insurance, you're that go-to person. You can maybe make some sales in other ways. Providing those educational materials, we talked about that earlier, especially with formularies, how that can be helpful for cost savings. Then demonstrating the value of their health insurance to their clients, creating some documents that show how much value comes with the coverage, where this is going to save them money, and how it applies to their day-to-day life. Offer other options, right? So you can offer some of that supplementary. We already talked about that, but supplementary things like accident, critical illness can be of low cost to the employer, if any. And there's another way you can provide value to that small group that is not just the plain old health coverage that they're thinking of. And I'm curious, in our last 1 minute of our presentation, if there's anything that you bring to the table that we haven't mentioned already that helps your client see the value in their health insurance. If there's anything that you have, let us know in the chat. It's always a good idea to bring a checklist with you, whether you've talked to a client one time or 1,000 times. It's a great idea to make sure that you are hitting every pain point for them and knowing everything about what you are doing for them, whether that be they had coverage before, you're changing it, whether it be you're a brand new agent to them, whether it be that you're getting coverage for the first time. Always a great idea to make sure that you're hitting every single thing for those clients of yours. So I promised you an hour of content and I hit an hour of content on the dot. Look at me. So if there's any questions that you have or anything you'd like to share, please do so in the chat. If you're interested in that coverage for companies thing that we talked about earlier today, that is going to be talked about next week. If you're interested in speaking to Randy or myself, we can be contacted at learningandactionbenefits.com, that email address on the center of your screen. If you really like learning the news from the perspective of Randy and Chelsea, or if you just really like hearing us even more throughout your day, you can go to our LinkedIn at Action Benefits Company. You can hear us at least twice a day, if not more. And then if you want to talk to your account manager, you want to talk to me, you want to talk to Randy, you want to talk to your individual account manager, you want to talk to anybody at Action, you can call that number on your screen and a lovely lady will answer the phone and direct you to whoever you would like to speak to.